right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Francisca. I hope you're all on your lunch break and watching our talk today. We are talking with Dr. Katie Foss today. Welcome, Dr. Foss. She is a professor of media studies at Middle Tennessee State University, where she teaches courses in digital literacy, children and media, and health communication. She is the author and editor of 6 books, including Constructing the Outbreak, Epidemics in Media and Collective Memory, and Beyond Princess Culture, Gender and Children's Marketing. Welcome, Dr. Foss.
Thank you for having me.
We're so happy that we get to talk about media literacy today and how to figure out which sources are credible and which ones aren't. And I would love for you to kind of lay the groundwork for us a little bit, just explaining what media literacy actually is and what it means to be a credible source or not.
Sure. So when we're talking about media literacy, we're talking about the ability to identify and discern different types of content. What is factual information, what's intended to be satirical, what is completely made up or exaggerated, or what kind of content do we just get just a snippet of the overall story where we're not quite seeing the whole perspective or having the context. So we define all of that as media literacy. And I should note that the ability to use media and consume media is very different than being able to understand and define and identify accurate information.
So why are we talking about this? Why is this such a big deal these days to actually be able to understand what we are consuming on a daily basis, and maybe even more importantly for parents, what our teenagers are consuming?
Well, it's really important, first of all, because there's just so much content out there that our digital climate is wonderful in providing with us with an abundance of different types of content, but at the same time, it can be really overwhelming. And it can be even more overwhelming when we're talking across generations. So what we're consuming as parents typically isn't the same thing as what our teenagers are consuming. So it's important as both as adults and as parents that we understand how to identify that credible information, that accurate information, and how to use information, not just as informed consumers ourselves, but also so that we can guide future generations. We can guide our teenagers into becoming digitally literate adults.
So does that mean that to truly help our kids, we have to consume what they are consuming?
Well, a little bit. And I know that, and I should say, as a parent of a teenager and a tweenager myself, I completely understand our reluctance sometimes to want to consume the same things that they are consuming. But we should do it enough that we understand a little bit about what kind of things do they enjoy looking at, what kind of videos, for example, on TikTok, are they watching? Do we want them to watch? Are they ready for TikTok? Are they ready for social media? We should at least consume enough that we know what they're doing so that we can help guide them towards like really understanding what they're consuming and also adding to their media diet. So it's not just about the TikTok, it's also about finding news information, for example. So we're going beyond the TikTok video.
So it's about that we actually balance out their media diet, so to speak.
Absolutely. And in that, we should look at our own media diets as well. So adults should be consuming a variety of different types of media content. And we can look at that in terms of levels, looking at local media content. And I'm especially talking about news more than entertainment forms right now, especially when we're talking about information. So we think about local news. We think about kind of more regional news. We think about national and international news, but we also think about platforms. So are we talking about TV news? Are we talking about traditional print media that's now become digital? Are we talking about website content? Or are we looking at newer forms, like, for example, just briefs on social media platforms designed to be informative? And the more variety of the media content that you consume, the more likely you are to be more media literate because you're having ways to check information across itself of, for example, the most relevant stories, or getting multiple perspectives on the same topic. And if we have those kinds of variety or various diets that are really well balanced, we can also help our kids, much like we would with food diets, right? That consuming a lot of different things helps you understand your overall consumption and what it means.
Now, are you most concerned about the news themselves, or about information that goes a little bit a different path? Like, I've talked to an expert last week. We were talking about health advice that teenagers get from TikTok, or, diet and this, like food advice, and, pretty much lifestyle advice all over the place from people that might even be their age, that are clearly on paper not experts, but present like experts.
And I would say news information overlap quite a bit, especially when in terms of finding accurate information. And certainly there's plenty of accurate information created by nonprofits or public health agencies. If we're talking about health information, that's not going to be considered news, but often overlaps with news in moments that need to be timely. For example, the latest CDC advice on RSV, which has been a problem, especially lately. When we're talking about teenagers, they need to understand what is news and what is not news, and who is producing the content, right? So that we look at who is producing it as a way to discern whether or not are they actual experts, or are they just presenting as experts. Just because you put on a white coat doesn't mean you're a doctor, for example, or you're a medical doctor. And how do you figure out who is telling this story, who's creating the content? Because it's not all equal. It's not an equal playing field, especially when we look at platforms without gatekeeping, like TikTok or YouTube, or people who are writing blogs, right? Nobody else is checking their information for them before it's released to the public. And our teenagers need to understand that.
Right. I think in the past we've been concerned / we joked about Wikipedia, right? Like whenever you write a school article or college, you say, please don't stop at Wikipedia. It may be fine to take a first peek at it, but that should not be your complete source. But now we have things that, so many sources, and again, they are not vetted. Now, how do we as parents guide our kids to say, okay, I'm reading this article or I watched this video. Which mental steps should I now take to see if this is a credible source?
So I would say the first step is, why are you looking for the information? Especially because the information that we consume, most of it we're seeking, right? We're going, even, you have to in some ways work harder for the content that you're going to access, because we're not just watching the nightly news, right? Or we're not just looking at the old set of encyclopedias upon the shelf, and that's the limits of our access to information. So what is the purpose? And that's going to guide these other steps that I'll share, is that, well, okay, what are we looking for? Information for a school report? Because as parents, that's often our role, right? Is to guide our kids in their school assignments. And if that's the case, okay, is it something more recent that has to be really timely, right? And so and with that, we might look at credible websites, for example, .gov or .edu. One way is to look at the last part of the URL. We're looking at, okay, who wrote or created the content, for what purpose? Are they making money off of creating that content? And I don't just mean like a regular job as a news anchor, but I mean like a social influencer that's telling you all about a wonderful product, probably is profiting in some way off of that product. And teenagers and adults need to understand that. If you're making a profit out of what you're talking about, it's not the same as an objective voice who's reviewing, or a health expert who's reviewing different products you could possibly use. Who looks to profit? What's their agenda? Are they experts in what they're doing? And then we can also look at the overall organization producing it. And what kind of steps did they have to go to put forth that information? right? A blogger can write about anything without having to do any kind of check, right? Versus if you're an organization, or especially a public health organization, you're going to have other people looking at the information you're creating, right? Or certainly somebody who's writing for a news organization has to go through steps to make sure that the information is factual, right? So as you're looking through information, ask yourself who stands to benefit, and then also why are they doing it, and what kinds of steps have been taken to check to make sure that it is accurate information.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, because I think when I look at platforms like Medium, for example.
That's an interesting one.
Well, because, yeah, I think so too, because on the one hand, you don't have the gatekeepers, and that is dangerous on one level, right? On the other hand, you actually have real niche articles that just get the chance to be published.
Yes.
Right? So it's like this clash of two things that where one is wonderful and the other one is a little dodgy.
And I love Medium, and I've published on Medium. So if you're looking at Medium, and you said it well, if you're looking at Medium, I would look at who is writing the article and look at the background of that person and where else have they published. Do they have credentials, PhDs, medical doctors? Are there other things that make them experts in what they're talking about? Then I would also look at the different links that they might share within the Medium article. Are they links to legitimate sources? For example, if you're writing a story on wildlife conservation, and one of the links might be to a National Geographic article, we're going to regard that as more legitimate than if they're just writing a completely an opinion piece, right? Or linking to stuff that's like other blogs, right? So we also look at the information that's embedded in an overall article. Medium can be a great place to start too, just like Wikipedia. So I'm not completely against Wikipedia, although if any of my students say that see this, do not cite Wikipedia. But just like with Medium, it can be our entry point into a body of content on a particular subject.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of balancing act. Now, I can already hear that people will say, this is a lot of work. Like, do I need, like, everything I read or hear or watch, do I need to now do like a 10-minute search on all these experts to double check? And that probably, I don't have the time to go down the rabbit hole every time I consume media. What's your response to that?
So I love that you said that, because I will say, no, you don't. You don't have to. The question is, what are you going to do with the information? So are you going to spread that information to another person, or to other people, or to the public, and post it on social media? If you're going to do that, if you're going to share a story, for example, on social media, then I would say you should do a little bit of work, because you become responsible for endorsing the content that you spread to other people.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, most people don't read the full article before they share something on a social media platform. But if you're going to share it, do a little bit of work. Or if you're going to cite it in a research paper, and I'm thinking especially for our teenagers, if you're going to cite it, do a little bit more work to make sure that's legitimate. If you're going to do a presentation on it, do a little bit more work. Look at another source or multiple sources to see and back up that information. But if you're just watching a news story, you're enjoying the TikTok, you're scrolling through videos, and you're not doing anything with it, you don't have to do anything, right? I would just take it with a grain of salt. We just take it kind of what it is. And it's perfectly okay to consume satire and parody and watch videos just to enjoy them. But are you going to do anything with it? If you take the next step, then yes, you should do a little bit of work to make sure that what you're putting forth is accurate information.
You said something interesting that I think about very often, and that is, do we only read the headlines, or do we actually read the article? How do we train ourselves, and how do we guide our children through not taking just the flashy headline and run with it, and actually say, well, either I don't read it, but then I'm not going to spread it, or have a real opinion on it, or I actually go ahead and read through the article so that I can have an informed stand on it.
Well, I think it can help to understand the purpose of a headline and also to understand the purpose of a clickbait headline. So there are certain types of headlines that tend to be linked to really sensationalized or even fabricated stories that are meant to get your attention. And those, if you use Yahoo or whatever your home base is as you enter online, and I sound like I'm 100 years old when I talk like that. But if we look at like things you'll never do or things you'll always do, or do this or you're going to die, or anything that is really, I would say, fueled, then it might be a clickbait headline. Clickbait headlines especially should be taken with a grain of salt for its content, because they aren't balanced in the design just to get your attention, much like a movie trailer or a commercial that you might see before a YouTube video. And then also think about the purpose of a headline, especially if we're talking about perhaps for a more legitimate source, is to just set up the story. Right? I would also look at the date with the headline, since things evolve and change too. Right? And then from that, decide, is this worth my time to read this story? And it's not always worth your time. We can't consume everything or we'd get burned out. And I would say just take up all our time and make us really anxious. So understand the purpose, look for balance in a headline, and then also be able to spot those clickbait headlines.
Right. That's good advice. Now, just like with the clickbait, you said, there is an agenda behind it.
Mm-hmm.
How can you give us a simple tool to understand agendas that drive media? Because you've already said it with influencers, very often it's as easy as money, right? They get money to promote a certain product.
Yes.
How can we spot other agendas?
And same with bloggers too, that can get money, or they're seeking to get money to promote, or sometimes on Instagram or the other platforms. If we're talking about news and information, a really good tool is the media bias chart. And it'll be linked in the chat, I believe, which is created by an agency that looks at and surveys people about the positions of various news organizations, or organizations at least that put forth themselves as news. To look at political affiliation and where the content lies can help you understand the agenda that they might be coming from. And this chart is updated every year, and it doesn't look at accuracy as much as it looks at political leaning, but that can help you understand where they're coming from as well. So not just about what content is commercialized or sponsored or part of a product integration, but also looking at different types of agenda.
Right. Now, people will probably argue that we live in a time where everyone is biased and where it's almost impossible to find sources that tell you the truth in a purely objective way. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, there's always bias. There's bias in all content ever created, ever, because humans create content and they decide what's relevant, what's not relevant, who to interview, who not to interview, what part do you put in first, what's less important. So unbiased in itself is a complete fallacy. We can also look to actually, and I won't get too history of newspapers here, but there have been times in which newspapers were completely funded by political parties. So if we want to talk about bias and agenda, we could look back to those times. It's more important to acknowledge that bias exists, but where is it coming from and what is the agenda and why? And to also, again, in that media diet, look at sources from various political affiliations, as well as, like I said, the different localized to international levels.
That is great. So we talked about kind of how to be the scholar for your own media consumption and which steps to take. But if you want parents to take something away from today's talk, and if you want tonight to have a dinner conversation about this with their kids, what are your takeaways, and what is their guidelines?
Well, first, I would say that parents should not be quick to just dismiss all news as fake news, which, by the way, is a highly politicized term, a buzzword, if you will, that doesn't quite mean false information like people use it. that absolutely misinformation and disinformation both exist in both fabricated and then misused content, right? But also that it's important for us to be thoughtful media consumers, to become media literate ourselves, to help guide our children, and that we shouldn't shy away from learning about the content that they enjoy. On the other hand, even if it's obnoxious sometimes, it's important for us to understand what they like and what they want to use so that we can also build on what they're consuming, so they're not just getting health information from TikTok, that we can build on that and say, well, if you're interested in this topic, here's some other sources we could also look at. And to start really having conversations with our kids about media consumption in a way that doesn't just judge them or dismiss what they like, but also just builds on that to help them become really thoughtful and digitally literate consumers.
Right. So it all comes down to transparency,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And approachability too, because if we just dismiss what they want to consume as dumb or irrelevant to what we enjoy, we're really not going to have the rapport to have those good conversations that are so important.
Do you think that teenagers are ready for all the social media they are on right now, or how do we guide them without becoming the mean parent?
So it shouldn't be an all or nothing. I would say getting our kids into the digital world that we live in, it should be something that happens gradually. It's something that happens, starts when they're little. And I'm not saying little kids should be on social media. I really don't think social media is appropriate for even tweens. I think that that's something you start to explore in teenage years. But becoming media literate can start happening when kids are younger. It can happen with fictional programming to talk about, okay, what's created for a show that's not real because it's a reality, again, for the videos that we're watching, right? We start having these conversations when you're reading books together, especially if you're reading books that were created a long time ago. You can talk about how things change, how content changes over time, and how we learn more about the world as we continue to move through it. And by building on the media literacy that you've established with other types of media and perhaps older forms, then we can start talking about social media use. Again, it's not designed for kids that are 12 and younger, and even I would say early teen years. It's questionable. Start using things like Facebook Messenger, which is just a communication tool, so they're not putting out content for the general public. Watch videos together on YouTube and talk about, okay, who's making the video and what's it for and what does it mean to have a video out there, right? And then I would also, of course, look into resources on careful social media use, on cyberbullying and all of that, which would be a whole different talk because it's an entity unto its own, right? But we don't have to be quick to say either absolutely no media and here you can do whatever you want. We have to be the parent, right? We have to be parents in monitoring what they're accessing and really building those communication skills about that content.
Well, this is perfect advice. And thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Foss. Where can people find you if they want to learn more, if they have questions for you?
Sure. So you can contact me at my email at my university at Middle Tennessee State University. I also have a blog in which I've written a number of different media literacy activities for kids to use, and particularly it was for the pandemic, but also some of them can be fun on a rainy day or a snow day. And that's profkatiefoss.com.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone.